I'm Julia DeWall. I am the co-founder and president of Antares, where we are building microreactors for critical infrastructure for the military and for off-grid commercial use cases. And I'm here to give a chat about nuclear energy. Has anyone been following the news this week? I was kind of like, you know what? We could all go home now because the tech giants are going to take care of everything. They've been deal making with just about every nuclear company and power plant there is out there. So it's really an exciting time for this talk. I will kick us off. We're going to be 6 sections. It'll just orient you a little bit. So we'll start out. This is probably a familiar chart to a lot of people, but nuclear represents 20% of the grid. Most people, they imagine it's about 2%, 3% of the grid. No one really knows that this is 20% of our grid. And it's sort of just been this underappreciated, very clean, carbon-free assets, about 50% of the US's carbon-free electricity generation that's been just kind of hanging on there. And next, nuclear is capacity factor, so the percentage of time that it's actually making electricity is one of the highest of all of the energy sources, about 93% on average. The plants in the US are operated very efficiently. So it's kind of these fun ones. It can always be running for us. And I think a theme that we'll see later on the talk is this is a very nice fit for data centers, especially as we're seeing this wave of AI. Super quick overview. Why is nuclear a particularly differentiated energy source? It's clean, so no carbon emissions. It's firm. It can operate 24/7 or whenever you want it to. There's minimal managed waste. So of the energy sources out there, this is an industry that takes care of every little tiny bit of its waste. All the waste generated in the US can fit on this football field. Very manageable. Safe. There have been no commercial deaths in the US from nuclear plants, very few abroad. And when you compare to other energy sources, one of the safest out there. Next, it is fuel, mining, and very space efficient. So this is kind of a fun little image here, but it's extremely dense. So nuclear fuel is 1,000,000 times as dense as coal. So you can imagine that that is incredibly important when you are trying to produce a lot of energy and you want to do it in a small space. It takes about 300 times as much land for wind to produce the same amount of energy, about 50 times as much land for solar to produce as much energy. And the last thing, just going back here, very low transmission build out. We could have a whole nother talk about transmission and the challenges there really are there, especially for the renewables build out. But there are, 41 out of 65 existing or current nuclear sites that have space for more reactors. So right now, ready to go, new reactors, and I think it's about a dozen of those that actually still have licensing open or at least partially licensed. And then there are a whole bunch of retiring coal plants, which have transmission lines already set up as well. These are going to be communities like we saw in Wyoming that want power, something in their district as the coal plants retire. I will kind of keep us moving here into what I'm just going to call the State of the Union. So a quick update on just where are we at with building. The US has 92 operating reactors across 54 different power plants. I think it's like in roughly about half the states there's going to be a power plant. We've shut down 13 reactors in the last decade, and only 2 have come online at Vogtle in Georgia. But what's really exciting is that there are now 2 currently retired plants slated to come back online, and this is just news of the last month or so. What about internationally? France and China are the other big nuclear powers after the US. They each have 56 reactors. And globally, there's actually a good amount of construction going on. We're seeing 60 reactors under construction right now. 27 of those are in China. 0 of those are in the US. There's literally not a single new plant even in contract right now to be built. And I think this 27 versus 0 is a very important topic and one we should be taking seriously. What about SMRs, microreactors, the category of advanced nuclear overall? I think, again, most people in this room are aware, but this is a category that's under development. So this is not something where we already have fleets of commercial SMRs going. This is not yet proven, but a lot of potential. So we'll come back to that as well. Next, another sort of stating the obvious here, but energy is critical. Energy access is a key determinant of the country's Human Development Index. And so that's a combination of GDP per capita, life expectancy, and education levels. To catch the world up to US standards of living, we'll need 5 times the amount of energy that we have today. And if we account for decarbonization and growth as we see it now, we're going to need 10x the amount of energy. And then overlay our climate goals on top of that. And it makes sense that the UN has finally decided at the last COP conference to include nuclear power. For those following, yay, 24 different countries pledged to triple their nuclear capacity by 2050. Believe it or not, people weren't even talking about nuclear at the previous COP conferences. So a lot is changing in the climate dialogue, and I'm really happy to see it. I think a lot of people here are as well. So the stage has been set for nuclear. The question is, can the nuclear industry meet the moment? And it wouldn't be a good nuclear talk if we didn't talk about regulatory. So I will start there. If you look back from 79 to 2012, the NRC licensed 0 new plants. There are also many other reasons for why these weren't happening, but the NRC is, needless to say, not been particularly active on helping the nuclear build out, right? So in 2012, we saw 2 reactors get licensed, Vogtle, which were completed in 2023 and 2024. So also shows you how long it's taken us to build new plants. And what has been exciting is that there actually has been movement now with the NRC. So people have followed. NuScale was the first SMR to get licensed last year. Kairos, which is one of the advanced reactor developers, they just got a test reactor license through the NRC. So there's movement, there's progress. The ADVANCE Act passed this summer. That was a hugely bipartisan congressional piece of legislation to modernize the NRC, to allow for greater support for nuclear. They expanded the mandate to not just be safety oriented, but to say, let's look at the broader picture of what American society needs. What are the costs? Let's start to look at cost benefit trade-offs. What about building nuclear versus the existing coal? Let's talk about like the broader picture. I'm really excited for some of the risk-informed, performance-based regulation they have in there. I'm excited about the certainty and predictability they want to provide. They want to be committed to clearer timelines. And they are also have particular support for first-of-a-kind reactors, which I think is really exciting. One more piece of promising news there is that they've just released a white paper on nth-of-a-kind microreactor licensing and development. So they are aware now that they need to move beyond site-specific, sort of think gigawatt plant licensing into how are we going to license microreactors that roll off a factory conveyor belt. So the conversations are there. I think people would say slowly and maybe a little too slowly, but they're happening. Beyond regulatory, what are some other headwinds we've seen? Supply chain, workforce, public sentiment. Supply chain and workforce are both very real. These are things that take years and years to develop and right now are quite atrophied. And this is just your classic chicken and egg dynamic, right? If you don't have the demand signal, the contracts in place, you're not going to see suppliers investing in their operations, new entrants coming into the market. Same thing goes for workforce. There aren't going to people, getting experience, let alone setting up training programs for this. I am hopeful that this will be something that will solve itself. Free markets tend to be pretty good at this. The DOE is also has a lot of infrastructure set up now for supporting supply chain in nuclear and supporting workforce development. So very grateful for their involvement and their interest in this topic too. As for public sentiment, for anyone who's been following the polls, there's been a huge shift, not just in the US. I mean, Germany's numbers are incredible. Used to be that polling was about 40-ish%, 45% in favor of new nuclear in the US or more nuclear. It's now trending in the mid-60s. Huge increase. Believe it or not, women are still well behind the curve, and it's one of the biggest differences you'll see in gender across any given topic. It's very bizarre. But for whatever reason, women tend to be much more anti-nuclear. So trying to work on that as well. But I'm not as concerned about public sentiment, not even close compared to some of the other issues here. Again, I think most new reactors will go in at existing sites. Existing sites have communities that are incredibly in favor of their local plant. I think we'll see the same in coal communities. So not to say that some NIMBYism, some environmental groups won't be trying to fight these things, especially with litigation, but I just don't think it's one of our top blockers. So let's talk about what I think will be or is our kind of the most meaningful blocker to nuclear right now. That is utility and grid structures themselves. I am far from a grid expert, but I will take a quick tangent on the grid because I think it's really, really critical. And I've had people asking me about this because people are confused by some of the news right now, right? It's like, wait a minute, Amazon, or Microsoft's just going to come in and like, how does that work? They're going to take the reactor from the grid. So let's just chat really briefly about grids. So, a third of the U.S. is a regulated market. 2/3 is deregulated. Major differences here that regulated markets operate as monopolies, so you have a single utility, and they make plans to spend money as needed for the reliability of the grid, and they charge ratepayers for that, and they make a defined rate of return. And this is not a perfect system, obviously. It incentivizes a lot of spend. And the wild part is that you don't see cheaper prices in deregulated markets. It's kind of a wash if you look at the data, and things are all over the place. Some areas just tend to be different, but it's wild that the deregulation of some electricity markets or the markets that did deregulate didn't actually result in that. So what's going on? In deregulated markets, power generators sell electricity into the grid through auctions, but there is an incredibly complex set of rules and incentives built into those that make it seem kind of like these RTOs, these grid operators, are just doing what a centralized utility might do, right? They're trying to make sure like they have the right amount of each thing so that the grid never goes down. They're setting these rules and incentives, and they use a clearing price approach, which rewards the lowest bidder at any given time. And this structure, as you can imagine, tends to favor renewables and natural gas, which are cheaper and which are more flexible. And so what you've seen is that renewables, especially with the subsidies that they have been benefiting from, are able to bid in at super cheap prices whenever it is that they have the sunlight or the wind, and then natural gas turns off during those times. They get paid capacity credits for being available. It's really important to the grid that they know that they have availability for spikes. What happens to nuclear? They're screwed. Because it's very hard for them to turn on and off, they're constantly running. And what does that mean? That means that when it's peak solar or peak wind time, they run and they operate at a loss. And they also don't benefit from those capacity payments that the natural gas plants benefit from. So they've been in a hard place, and they just haven't been kind of valued, I think, according to what we're now seeing the value of nuclear to be on a given grid. Okay, back from the grid tangent here. You can see why deregulated markets are structurally difficult for existing plants, let alone making a huge capital investment into one of these markets. And I think this is why we see a lot of new natural gas getting built. It's $1 billion a plant. People know how to do it. You see it's 44% of US electricity right now is natural gas. It's cheap, it's easy, and the deregulated markets in particular are very much incentivize this sort of a structure. What I think will be really interesting to see play out is if these supposedly deregulated markets are really as free market as they sort of claim to be. What if people want to pay more for nuclear? What if generators want to just go directly to off-takers? So nuclear power plant says, yeah, I want to go work with Microsoft because they're going to offer me more money than the grid is. That's how markets work, right? I think we have a regulatory kind of grid operator reckoning underway as we see these tech companies come in and these nuclear power plants all of a sudden have a lot of people knocking on their doors, including the retired ones. And so I think this is where there's going to be kind of the most action coming up over the next few years. What I've been hearing from energy developers, because I find it very interesting to go talk to some of the natural gas developers and others, because they're talking with these tech company teams, who, by the way, I think are quite sophisticated. These are big energy teams getting built out, and they're willing to pay 3 to 5x current grid prices to have nuclear power. Like this is something that we're seeing a big shift in. And so I think the question is going to be like, will these tech companies be able to strike a whole bunch more direct deals and actually pull that power away from the grid? And then also, will they be the ones to finance net new nuclear builds. And I think that's the big thing we're going to see play out in the coming years. We talked about the structural challenges of the grid. Next, I want to just talk briefly on the structural challenges of utility companies and project risk in building a new plant. And simply put, the price tag of building a new nuclear plant for a single utility is too big. It's too much for them, risks them going bankrupt if it doesn't work out, and their risk appetite is just too small. They haven't been building a lot of these big things. They're not stepping up to the plate to want to do it. And this is actually where the SMR thesis comes into play. And Brett's in the room here with Last Energy, so you guys should all come talk to him after. Maybe he'll make a few remarks after this, but this is where people are saying SMRs. Okay, yeah, they're going to produce less power, but guess what? We can do it because it's going to be less capital for us. It's going to be less of a percentage of our balance sheet to try to go do this. And let's see if we can make it work with just that, with less amount of risk. And so I think this is where we're going to see, and we've already started to see this week in particular, a lot of deals being struck around SMRs. Granted, unlike the AP1000, which is the big gigawatt scale size one that we've seen, SMRs, again, there's still a question mark on like how much really is it going to cost. But the idea here is that these are less construction projects, more mass producible, and ultimately economies of scale type products. And these should be cost efficient, especially once we get up to nth of a kind delivery. Okay, section 5 of 6, opportunities in nuclear, I believe to be in what I'm calling premium power. So for customers who are willing to pay more than just what you pay for grid scale electricity. And this is where I believe that there are two opportunities here at play for where we're going to see the next nuclear builds come to fruition. And the first is that demand for 24/7 clean power for the for the data centers that are going to be part of this AI revolution. And the 2023 FERC filings doubled the 5-year load growth forecast from 2.6% to 4.7% growth in a single year. Let me repeat that. FERC, who's looking at all electricity uses, has already in a single year doubled its forecast to almost 5% growth in what they see as the next 5 years. And that compares to an average of a little over 0%. It's been minuscule growth, and now we're seeing massive growth. So especially because we have the net zero pledges, the commitments to clean power, I think this is what's going to be driving a lot of this demand for nuclear power in particular. The other thing I'll say is that these major tech companies, many of them actually have or are evolving what used to be a renewables first focus. Amazon had a renewable strategy. Apple, famously wouldn't include the word nuclear on their website as it related to their climate strategy. Everyone has now revised those, included nuclear, and they frankly have bought up as many renewable projects as they can, and they're running out for maybe some obvious reasons. We're not quite there yet on renewables in terms of being able to have a 100% renewable strategy with battery storage, because if you do that, guess what? You're talking price points that are well up there with nuclear. And you also have to deal with location. So a lot of these data centers want to be close to their end users in population centers. There is no space to build out the amount of solar farms plus battery storage that you need for these projects. Hence, everyone going to look at nuclear. So quickly, what have we seen in the news? We have Microsoft with Constellation, $1.6 billion to invest in the 3 Mile Island coming back online, gigawatt scale plant. We have Amazon. Gosh, there's multiple pieces of news now of Amazon. I cannot even keep up. But they're buying data centers that are nuclear powered. They're expanding in the Northwest, partnering with the local utilities to build additional SMRs. They are making investments into SMR companies. Google's now in the race. They've agreed to purchase multiple reactors from Kairos. This is advanced nuclear. So the list honestly goes on, and I think we'll only see more coming. The second opportunity is in meeting the demand for energy resilience for the Department of Defense's critical infrastructure. This is where Antares comes in. This is the company that I started a year and a half ago. We are building microreactors to meet the mission readiness needs of critical infrastructure for the military. And the military buys for capability. They do not buy simply energy. They are not price sensitive. They are the perfect fit for premium power. And they are already the biggest purchasers of non-commodity energy. The receipts they have on the diesel quantities and price per gallon they spend is just sort of unheard of. So energy resilience, another thing I'll say there is that this has become more and more of a priority, especially since the Russia-Ukraine conflict. It didn't show up in the DoD's strategy memos. It is now a top priority. And so people are really starting to think about energy resilience and taking this topic quite seriously. And microreactors are particularly well suited to provide energy resilience to meet national security needs. And I'll give you an idea of some of the applications that we're working with the military on. There are military defense sites, especially in places like the Arctic and other off-grid locations. So you can think about forward deployed locations to have readiness across various island chains in the Pacific. And then there are even what's currently grid connected locations that do have some backup diesel, but people just want more. They know that the ICBM silos are a great example. Using grid scale power, but when they were built, cyber attacks on the grid weren't a thing. Now we're saying, wow, we're still relying on the grid for this. Like, we should probably do something different. And God forbid there were like a multi-week outage on the grid or even multi-day. Like, things get really rough. We saw this in Texas. Do we want to be now pulling diesel supply chain away from civilians who are trying to put these in their generators to heat their homes? Right. Let's have something that the military can really benefit from for resilience. And I'll say there is also increasing interest in space-based power. And the reactor we have is a 300 kilowatt reactor. You can think about something that fits in this room, and that would be about like 300 homes worth of electricity equivalent. Size that down a little bit, and the way our reactor is designed with heat pipes is very compatible for space-based usage. That's another area we're working with the military on. We have a contract with Space Force for some work there. And lastly, underwater. As you probably, if you follow sort of military stuff, there's a big push away from exquisite systems into attritable systems. And the same thing goes for underwater. We have about 70 nuclear-powered submarines today. People want to have swarms of much smaller craft that can go much more maneuverable, less detectable. And today, the battery-powered versions only last you a few days. What could you do with nuclear power? Okay, so those were the two premium power opportunities. You go after the tech giants and the AI boom of data centers, and then go after critical infrastructure. These are two sets of customers who are willing to pay a bit more. Always a good place to start when you have something very capitally intensive or needs, still has first of a kind costs. As we see that come down, then you're able to have real scale. So last section I want to talk about here is actually achieving the build out. So if you go back to the facts here, we have 0 contracts for new mega scale, gigawatt scale plants. What needs to change? How do we get from 0 to 1? And I'm going to go through a little 3-step strategy to get there. So I think you start at the low-hanging fruit. What's the low-hanging fruit? It's bringing back online the retired plants. And I think that makes the most sense, right? You don't have to start from scratch. Less money required. The more recently it was retired, the better. If they've already started taking it apart, selling off the pieces, much less helpful. So there are 3 recently retired plants that have not been sort of taken apart. 2 of 3 have are already under contract to be restarted, and that's really exciting. I think it's Microsoft drove one of those with the big Constellation deal. They're going to be putting a lot of money into this power purchase agreement. The other one is an interesting one, Palisades in Michigan. You have a company that has called Holtec that's leading this recommissioning, but they've historically made all their money in decommissioning. Think of the last 13 that got shut down over the last decade. So they are having a business strategy change, and I love that. Right, this is a company that does deeply know nuclear. They have the workforce. They are now going to be bringing a plant back online. I think this is the type of sort of market forces you want to see. And I'm excited about these 2 kind of coming out of retirements. Just as an interesting point of comparison, Japan shut all of their nuclear power plants down after Fukushima in 2011. That was 54 reactors. They have brought back on 10 of them. So can be done, should be done, frankly. And Japan's still working on doing even more. Second, get creative with what you can do at existing plants. I think it's like walk before you run. So what if you could increase the output at existing reactors through various types of enhancement methods, retrofits, which would allow the plant to produce more power. There's actually currently a company that is raising a seed round right now to do exactly this. I couldn't be more excited about it. I think it's very creative. Let's take the technology we have, the light water technology we have, build it out. And there are actually currently 5 existing nuclear power plants that hold active construction operation licenses already. So we also have these sites that are sort of right there, ready to go. And this is where I think we need to now cultivate these scenarios that allow bringing new grid scale reactors online, as well as our good friends, the SMRs. Notice I don't say microreactors here because that's not really what you want for grid scale power. But SMRs and grid and kind of gigawatt scale are what you're going to see here. 2 promising concepts. One is that utilities get together, or other entities get together in consortiums that build several plants at once instead of just one, so no one has to take on that first mover risk, and that everyone benefits from the learning curve. This is something that the DOE is actually really pushing. They've published this liftoff report that's trying to get the word out that, like, hey, consortiums are the way to go. Like, check it out. And they do a whole study on what happened at Vogtle. Why was it so expensive? Why did it take so long? What are the lessons learned? To say, like, we can do this better. We really can. Here's some ideas on how. We've studied it extensively. I'll try to give you as much of a playbook as I can. And 2, is I just think tech companies being involved here is the way to go. I mean, we know the free markets work well in America. It's what we do best. They have enormous balance sheets. They have great margins. They have very talented teams. And they have skin in the game now. They want this power. They want it to be clean. So I'm really bullish on them being that kind of deal maker and bringing together the developers, the project finance people, the construction workforce, the utilities themselves, and being the glue there and kind of helping catalyze those initial first projects. And finally, I will say the DOE, gotta love the government-supported, free market-driven approaches. The Loan Programs Office has billions of dollars ready to go. If you've ever heard Jigger Shah speak, he's like, show up, no one's knocking on my door. I got billions of dollars to loan out to support new nuclear builds. So with that, I will wrap up and open it up for Q&A.